Hello there, and welcome to a Metropol TV exclusive 2019. I can't believe it's 2019 already, Brenda.
It is, Simba. How's your 2019 so far?
Pretty much good. I can't complain. It started okay. Well, what are we calling these a Metropol TV exclusive?
Well, we're calling this a Metropol TV exclusive because we're giving you an insight to Metropol TV's Big 10 business headlines that shook the Kenyan economy in 2018.
Which is very important because as we forecast for 2019, we have to look back to 2018 to try and understand what will happen in 2019.
To help shed more light on the conversation we're having today, we have
All right, Brenda, shall we get started?
Yes, starting us off at number one, in a report by the National Environmental Management Authority dated 26 June, the government had earmarked buildings, structures, as well as facilities that were sitting on riparian land.
Now, the agency and the Ministry of Environment introduced a new word to the Kenyan economy, riparian land. Now, many Kenyans try to understand what this word really meant, with social media awash with memes or people trying to get their head around this. But what they should have been focused on is the consequences of this word. Now, the report had a list of buildings that were marked for destruction.
The list had 4,000 buildings, shocking the business community as premises owners rushed to court to stop the move, but to no avail.
Now, this is because the list contained a number of buildings that were central to the economic performance of the city, including Taj Mall, Nakumatt UK, and other famous hotels in the city. With business persons witnessing a total demolition of their businesses, which inconvenience their day-to-day operations. Are we that sort of an economy that waits for things to spiral out of hand and then try to correct it when it's too late? This is where we have to bring in our experts to also help us weigh in on this.
We have a lapse between policies and implementation of surveillance to ensure implementation of those policies. We have policies existing, we have legislation, like for example, the distance that one should build away from the riparian, from the river. You see, I think 10 meters away from the river. It exists. And also the distance away from the road reserve. But we have gotten in a situation where there's just impunity of the law. But again, the agencies that should ensure these policies are adhered to have kind of come in late, you see. So the prolonged period has led to mushrooming of these structures along these prohibited areas. The law should be adhered to in the first place, because it has repercussions in the long term. For example, constructing a building on the riparian land, it affects marine life because we have effluents from, for example, industries flowing into the river. So what I will say is, in the long term, we should all have these buildings demolished if they are not established in the right place. 2019, we are likely to experience, but not to that scale that we experienced last year. Yes, because that directive was just temporary, because we needed to have consultation with the stakeholders before demolition can continue. Looking at the initial position by the president, he was for demolition. He supposed demolition of, because it's impunity, it's violation of the law, and he understands that it will have long-term negative impact to the economy.
That is not the only big headline of 2018, Simba.
Another factor that influenced the increased investments across 2018 in the real estate sector was the launching of the affordable house projects by the government, like the real estate project launched at Pangani Another factor being the improved macroeconomic climate in the country, with the GDP in the third quarter of 2017 growing from 4.7% to the one at 6% that was recorded in the third quarter of 2018.
And despite having a good supporting climate to make returns, the surprising fact is the sector recorded less than it did in the year 2017. In a report by Citon Investments, the total returns in 2018 were 11.2% compared to the 14.1% in 2017.
Now, Brenda, we understand that there are a lot of factors that can actually influence the performance of the real estate sector, because we've just spoken about the demolition of buildings in 2018. But what we want to ask, why, even with all this, do we have this slowdown?
And a lot of experts say that we're headed to a real estate bubble that is about to burst. But the question is, does it even exist?
Real estate has been affected by the cost of the construction materials, the tax structure, and even the cost of land, for example. All these factors have then contributed to very high cost of construction, which then has affected the real estate. We've had a bit of inflation over time, which has caused the cost of construction to increase. Materials like cement increase. The investor will factor it into the building so that the price at which you will purchase a building is high. So by that, then it reduces demand.
Now, Brenda, this is a big one because it brought the CBD to a standstill. You remember back in 2018?
Yes, I remember it very well.
The CBD matatu ban. Now, Nairobians woke up to county askaris and other traffic police officers that made sure that the public transport did not access the CBD. Now, most of the commuters had to be dropped at the established bus termini, and then they had to walk a few meters or kilometers to the CBD.
And small businesses operating within the CBD suffered heavy losses as Mike Sonko's directive of denying public transport to drop in town left customers far away on the streets. After
public outcry from the citizens, the business persons, and some of the lawmakers in the country, the move was overturned. Now, Brenda, what do you think was your highlight for that day when the matatus were banned from the CBD?
Well, Simba, my highlight for that day is the fact that this move was put in order to reduce congestion in town. Yet that day, I got home at 8 p.m.
I don't want to envy you, Brenda. If you go back to 2018, that is. Now, I want to bring in some of the experts that we have today to weigh in on the sector.
The matatu ban also came as a surprise. And most people, talking to my friends, they say it was not well thought out. Especially, they targeted the wrong, it was a wrong strategy, targeting at a wrong, let me say, sector.
Whenever you make a decision, there are pros and cons. Nairobi has a population now of about 4 million. What we require is a much more coordinated system of transport. We need to look at cities of the same size and bigger than us. We look at, go to South Korea, go to US, go to Germany and see how the transport system is being managed. What we need are, because we cannot expand so much, what we basically need are means of transport that are going to be economical in terms of volumes. So what we need now, we need basically things like a rail transport system. Matatus are fast, but the problem with the matatus is that they're not able to carry as many people as the numbers in Nairobi. I've told you about 4 million. If you get one bus that can carry 100 people, for example, one matatu carries 13 people. That would be about 7 matatus. When packed back to back, you can see the kind of traffic they would need. So what we need in Nairobi is a railway transport, maybe overhead or underground. Tram system, if you go to Germany, if you go to US, if you go to South Korea, that is what we'll address. For that to happen, we need to make the environment conducive. conducible. Two, matatus also, they do not follow the rules by and large. That is the unfortunate thing. If they're following rules in terms of year service, in terms of basic ethical standards, then any investor who is serious would invest in that business. But because they don't follow the rules, they have their own, cliques. Serious investors will not go there. But again, you need to know that up to 70% of people in Nairobi are transported by what? Public transport. So that is something that the government needs. I support the ban, because with that ban is where now it would promote the need to create bigger and more efficient means of transport. Short-term, people will obviously suffer, the drivers and those conductors, but in the long term, the benefits will be better than the cost.
Now, the next one makes it to our list today because it talks about Kenya's macroeconomic fundamentals being overly positive in 2018.
Which is due to the improved GDP growth of the country, better weather conditions, as well as a conducive operating environment. According to Metropol data, Kenya's GDP has been on an upward trend. Let's take a look at the pattern. Top on the list of the companies that negated the overall positive macroeconomic fundamentals in the economy last year was Kenya Power, that blamed a depressed economic environment. Sanlam also said its impairment of assets meant business was going to be on a dip last year. Samir Africa did not blame to local economic climate by insisting that its offshore manufacturing partners faced a lot of challenges. Bamburi Cement said high energy prices internationally were to blame for its dip. Deacons found an explanation in a slow economic start in 2018, despite figures telling a different story. Housing Finance found a reason in staff reduction expenses.
Now, the country's GDP adjusted for inflation, increasing at 5.7% in the first quarter, 6.3% in the second quarter, and 6.0% in the third quarter, leading to an overall 6% increase in GDP compared to 4.7% over the same period in 2017.
The growth has been against a backdrop of a stable macroeconomic environment, which we seek to understand from our experts.
When you look at 2017, the growth rate of 4.9, looking at 2018, average growth rate 6.0, is mainly explained by, in 2017, because of the drought and the electioneering period. In 2018, things stabilized. We had a conducive political environment. And so, yeah, we had improvement in terms of GDP growth. 2018, one of the positives is that we had an increase both in numbers of tourists, but also in terms of earnings.
This is an exciting one because it even started actually before last year.
Yes, Simba, and this was one of the major highlights of last year because KQ launched direct flight to New York.
Now, in a much celebrated move, even with the Kenyan President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta in attendance, the airline launched daily non-stop flights from Nairobi to New York.
Tickets were being sold at a price of 96,000 Kenyan shillings as the carrier hoped this move would boost the visiting of American citizens as well as deepen commercial activity between the two countries.
Now, even as we celebrate this move, we have to shift our focus to how the airline has been performing years before this move so that we make our decisions whether this was a good business move.
I believe it's a decision that was made looking at economic benefits that can arise from that. That question needs a deep analysis, yeah, so that looking at the option of first solving the domestic problems before flying to New York, that I will say it depends. Perhaps we're making losses because we're not flying to the New York. Looking at the Dreamliner, from the analysis I got from Kenya Airways, is that Dreamliner is efficient in terms of fuel utilization. If we're able to save, we'll be able to leverage on the profitability. I also underscore the importance of having domestic flights because we have numbers. When you look at tourists that come to Kenya, US is one of the top We have UK, US, and some Japan, Italy. You cannot rule out US in terms of the future economic growth path for Kenya.
Simba, what is this rumor I'm hearing about a new currency?
Brenda, it's not a rumor, it's actually real, because in 2018, the Central Bank of Kenya announced that as from 2019, that is this year, there shall be new currency in circulation in the Kenyan economy. And this is so that we conform to the Constitution's demand of having no portrait, that is for human beings, on our currency.
And this is a big story because British firm Delarue won the tender to print the new currency at a cost of $150 million.
That is $150 million, Brenda.
Yes, Simba.
And this economy that is already dead jumped.
And despite that, Kenyans are very excited for the new currency to be printed, as our president calls it a celebration of our culture. But the question is, do we really need to spend so much money for a new currency?
Brenda, just to get a view of this, what do you like or love about our old currency?
What I like about our old currency, it's been there for many years, so it's part of life. But I think it's about time we get change.
So you want to tell me that there's nothing about our old currency that reflects our culture?
Honestly speaking, no, because I feel like our culture is based on the forest, the animals in this country, and the fact that we're going to have a new currency that's based on animals is very exciting.
Are you saying that the antelopes, cheetah, lion, and rhinos and gazelles represent our culture better than Moye?
Simba, I only have one question for you. When tourists come into this country, do they come to see President Uhuru Kenyatta or the animals?
Well, at this point, I really have to bring in Noah to also help us weigh in on this.
Looking at most of the regional currencies, like for example the rand and Tanzanian currency, you'll find that they have all these animals on their currencies. In Kenya, yes, we have those big five, but that's not the only way in which we can improve our currency in terms of the appeal or outlook.
The government, it's true, is going to spend up to $150 billion on that. Well, the right figures in terms of shillings, the government is going to spend about 11.1 billion shillings over the next 3 years to print their new currency. That is true. Over a year, it's going to be about, per year for the next 3 years, it's about 2.4 billion shillings. That is true. The government cannot do much about that because this is a constitutional requirement. When the new constitution was promulgated in 2010, one of the requirements of the constitution is that new currency notes should be printed that do not have images of politicians and people, but they can have images of buildings and images of national, animals, but not people. This, the government ought to have done it early, immediately after 2010, but there was a legal case that that was filed against Delarue because he's the one that won the tender. So that's what has dragged the case, and when that case was thrown out or quashed, that decision was quashed last year, the government went and printed. So it's a constitutional requirement. For it not to print it, they will basically be violating the constitution. Yes. Second is also, besides that being the main reason, a constitutional requirement that the president must fulfill, the central bank was mandated to do that, so it took up that. Second reason, the new currency notes also have certain features that were not there in the old currency notes. For example, visually impaired. It has features that visually impaired people now can use, something that before were not in the old currency.
Kenya made 202 billion Kenyan shillings in a new sovereign bond issued in 2 equal tranches of 10 years at a coupon of 7.25% and 30 years at a coupon of 8.25%.
The bond that was listed in the London Stock Exchange was highly oversubscribed, attracting bids worth 1.4 trillion Kenyan shillings. And the Treasury said that this was an expression of faith in the future prospects of the Kenyan economy by international investors. The question really is, was this a sign of an economic boom or an economy trying to gamble itself out of the rubble?
Well, as a country, for you to grow, you must obviously invest in infrastructure. That is so key, because it's through that is the machinery that will have goods moving up and down through the country, exports and that. So you need to invest in infrastructure. The question is, the amount that was borrowed, is that amount what was needed for infrastructure? Sometimes you may be investing so much in infrastructure and then you end up with nothing to transport. If you look at something like probably SGR, the questions that are coming out is that when you look at what we call return on investment, the amount of money we have put on the SGR, are we getting adequate returns? Because ideally for a project to be sustainable, it should be able to generate enough returns to be able to pay the cost of that. So that is something we just need to ask whether what we borrowed. And the other thing is the Euro bonds we are borrowing, are we using them for the purposes for which they are borrowed? Because there must be returns. If you're using them for recurrent expenditure, for example, then basically there'll be no return on that. So the borrowings, it's required, but the question is how much. We need to look at certain ratios and see whether that is viable or not. The wealthiest country in the world is US, but again is the most indebted country in the world. But what US does is that it borrows and uses that money optimally and is able to give its returns are positive. So that is just something as a country we need to calculate effectively the return on these borrowings.
2018, Brenda, was a year of scandal after scandal, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And the scandals made it to our list.
And we're talking about the 2018 NYS 10 billion Kenyan shillings scandal that shook the Kenyan government as it was in the process of sanitizing the NYS department.
Now that aside, that was just the opening of other scandals that cost the government a lot of money. Now here is a full list of the scandals that rocked the economy last year and how much they cost the taxpayer.
Yes, scandal after scandal. Even as the economy pulled a stable outlook through a general positivity in macroeconomic fundamentals, this did not stop the taint by big money losses in key sectors in the economy. Topping the list in scandals was the second 9 billion Kenyan shillings NYS scandal that caught the government by surprise. The agricultural sector took a bite of the scandal saga by recording a 1.9 billion Kenyan shilling scandal that caused a huge uproar for maize farmers in the country. The health sector contributed to the taint in its 1.5 billion Kenyan shillings NHIF insurance fund, closely related to the Kenya Power saga that contributed a loss of 400 million Kenyan shillings to the corruption plate. The energy sector was represented too, with Kenya Pipeline unable to fully account for the 2 billion Kenyan shillings petroleum jetty in Kisumu. The transport sector closed the year with revelations of a dubious SGR compensations which the government could not put a price tag on.
This money flowing into the economy, the question is, how does it affect the economy and how does the local mwananchi feel it?
When you lose so much, on the other hand, it means you did not implement what you intended to. Yes, so it directly affects public service delivery. Then on the other hand, when you look at the high debt that we are incurring and the high debt servicing charges that we are incurring yearly, you realize that there's no value for money. We are borrowing on one hand and losing on the other side.
Yes.
So, and the person who gets the hit is the common mwananchi. They get affected directly, especially because they are denied the services that they should get from the government. And on the other hand, they also they incur high cost in terms of payment of the debt because they are being taxed, and that raises the cost of living.
Yes.
And you see, for example, implementation of the 8% VAT on petroleum fuel directly affects, because they have to incur high transportation costs. Small and medium enterprises get affected because they have to transport their goods to the market.
I feel like it cannot be a Big Ten without the banking sector coming inside.
I couldn't agree more, Simba.
Now, local banks continue to outperform the international peers when it comes to profit, even as they continued to fight the law that caps on interest rates.
Now, the law requires banks to advance credit to the private sector at no more than 4% of Central Bank of Kenya's lending rate, which is at 10.5%.
Now, a report done by the Financial Times, a London-based newspaper, puts the three biggest lenders in the country, that is KCB, Cooperative Bank and Equity Bank, among the top 20 earners in the world based on return on assets.
The Kenyan banks, however, launched row in the overall top 1,000 banks of the world in the 2018 report. Coming in at position 799 was Equity Bank, position 809 was KCB Bank, and position 951 Cooperative Bank. The Banker 2018 report has ranked the lenders on the basis of size, growth, and profitability.
Equity Bank takes position 11 in the world at 5.3% return on assets. Kenya Commercial Bank, that is KCB, follows at position 14th as the most profitable bank on return on assets at 4.5%. And this is according to the survey.
KCB continued to pitch a larger share of the profits ahead of its peers, recording the highest return in profits from periods stretching from the first quarter. Period starting from 31st 2018 to the third quarter, 30th September 2018, a year that saw its stability marked by the completion of its assignments as the Kenya Deposit Insurance Corporation appointed receiver manager in Chase Bank Limited. Equity Public Listed Company and Cooperative Public Listed Company took position 2 and 3 respectively in profits after tax, reflecting the same picture in global rankings of the banks in returns.
What does this mean for the banking sector and the economic climate in the country?
Well, the capping of interest rates was actually earlier than last year. Yeah, last year is when now there were a lot of talks in terms of whether it should be, the interest rate should be, cap should be removed or not. I'll tell you, interest rates has both pros, caps and cons. Before, we had a lot of people, there was access to loans because this was liberalized. Banks could give loans for as low as 10% and as high as 21%. Because before you give a loan, you have to look at what is called risk. You have to do what is called credit appraisal. Entities that want, companies that want loans but do not have collateral, the risk is high. So for that banks would load in another extra risk factor, premium on that. What does that mean? It means small companies, SMEs, and that could easily get loans but pay heavily through the nose. That was impacting on the operations because interest increases the cost of doing business. But it was available. With the interest cap, then also the cost of, let's say, borrowing, mortgage, etc. went high because the interest was high. But with the cap of interest at 14%, it means now that you could borrow funds at a lower rate, which was good for the business. But unfortunately, that was bad for the banks because banks, that was a major source of income. So what has happened, the flip side of it is that with the interest cap, banks are now lending less and less to SMEs and small borrowers because of the risk. Before you could get Juakali, somebody operating by the roadside, go to the bank, get a loan, and be given at 21%. They had factored a huge risk, taking into consideration the following day. That business may not be there. It could have been demolished overnight. But now with an interest cap of 14%, the margins are so low that the banks are saying is not worthwhile. So they are holding on to that money and then giving now to the big corporates that are steady, have collateral and that. So the flip side of that, or the disadvantages of that, is that now the small SMEs do not have access to funds. And without access to funds, you cannot grow, you cannot increase your business. And that is a country like Kenya that is much more, we are focusing more on entrepreneurship. You'll need money to grow. So that is the unfortunate thing now. Banks are divided into tiers. You have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which are based on, these tiers is based on the size of the bank, based on the performance of the bank, based on the stability of the bank, based on its cap on the assets, is based on the number of branches. So for that, what has happened as interest rates were capped, tier banks, they had a different clientele, corporate clients and above. These are people who, even without the liberalization, the interest rates were not that high. Because of their base, they were able to negotiate on the interest rates. So for that, as much as the interest rates caps have gone, they've been affected, but not much because their focus was on the corporate clients. The ones that have been affected most are the lower tier banks, because these are the major clients who are the SMEs and small business people. So these are the ones that have been affected most. So both have been affected, but big tier banks have not been affected much because of the corporates. They are lending money to big companies like Unilever, Safaricom, EABL, and even the government. They're dealing a lot with the government in terms of lending government money. So that, you see, they have not been affected heavily, as much as small tier banks.
Now, Brenda, we cannot talk about the Big Ten from 2018 without mentioning public debt.
Most definitely, public debt was one of the major headlines from last year that we have to address. International rating company Moody's noted Kenya's efforts in increasing its revenue collections as well as injecting fiscal discipline as most unlikely to help its failing fiscal trend shoot up.
Now, the agency puts Kenya's economy as B2. Simply put, it sees Kenya's economy as balanced and just able to sustain a positive outlook.
Agency also saw Kenya's debt payment as a share of revenue to hit 20% in the year 2018 as compared to the 9% in the year 2017.
Now, another report by the Treasury puts Kenya's debt at 5.6 trillion shillings as of June last year. The report also says that Kenya's total debt, that is both domestic and international, was at 5.1 trillion shillings as of June last year, that being 50.9% of the total debt. What do we expect in 2019?
I think Moody's assessment, in my opinion, they're not biased. I don't think they have so much interest in painting a wrong picture in Kenya, because yes, the true fact is that we are borrowing a lot, and just looking at the progress from where we've come from, the situation has worsened. Our debt to GDP ratio has increased. So, and you'll expect that we will drop in terms of our standings. So being demoted from B1 to B2, that's an unfavorable situation to be in. And it also coincides, you see, if you're able to, in order to assess whether the rating was biased or not, you can also just logically look at where we've come from. So the facts speak for themselves, that we are worsening more than we are improving. Looking at the projects that have been earmarked, the final phase from Naivasha all the way to Malaba, requiring above 400 billion Kenyan shillings, and other ambitious projects that the government has, like having the dual highway from Nairobi to Mombasa. If the government does not have a second thought on the implication of this debt to GDP and goes ahead to borrow, we may get into much deeper problems. Kenya may default on payment of its debt, and hence putting at a risk in terms of the assets that we have. Analyzing the three regimes, for example, looking at the Moi regime, looking at the Kibaki regime, and looking at the Uhuru's regime, you find that in Uhuru's regime, the trend of the ratio of the total public debt to GDP has sharply increased, while in Kibaki's regime it was reducing. So by that, if the trend continues based on history, we may go deeper into debt, which is not a good thing.
And that was it for Metropol TV Big Ten exclusive.
We've sadly come to an end, but if you want more of this, do follow us on our social media platforms. That is at Metropol TV KE on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as YouTube.
And a big thank you to our experts for making this an exclusive. It certainly was. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage.
And I'm Brenda Nyamichaba.